Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Feed the Beast Revelation, and today is the day that we're going to start work on our base area. Well, kind of. We're actually going to try and figure out the base style for our base area. At least, hopefully. I don't know that we'll actually get to the point of having the kind of 100% clear idea of how our base is going to look yet today, but if we can at least narrow it down to a base architecture style, or even just a few different ones that we can work with going forward and try them out, that's going to be a huge, huge help. Because I do actually want to get started on our base area soon and start building individual buildings that do all kinds of cool stuff, rather than depending on our little starter hut thing. So that's going to be cool, but before we dive into that, and before we test out different architecture styles and different material types, before we do all of that, there is one other thing I want to take care of very quickly, and that is cleaning up this area. So here in the Badlands biome, there's these big stone patches, and I actually kind of like that. It gives the biome some character, but I think it's a little bit too much in this area. I think this is a little bit too much stone. I think it's a little bit too messy looking. There's all these gravel and diorite and andesite and granite and random ores. There's these boulders of cobble that are just kind of cubes. All of that stuff looks kind of lame to me. It doesn't look quite good enough. So what I think I'm going to do, just as a temporary solution, is I'm going to go through, I'm going to fill in some of the water pools, I'm going to try and even out the terrain a little bit, get rid of all of these boulders, and I'm going to convert everything over to dirt. And eventually, of course, that will convert over to grass. Now, I know that sounds a little bit boring, just turning this into a plains, basically, but eventually I'll go back through and work in little patches of stone and work in some better-looking boulders, but for right now, I think it's just going to be beneficial to have a basic grass patch to work with. And then, of course, eventually we're going to expand out our builds into other areas of the Badlands, and we'll worry about that when we get there. So, obviously that would be kind of a pain. This is a really large area, and I don't want to have to manually dig all of this up and replace it with dirt. But, well, we're playing modded Minecraft, and modded Minecraft has a solution for everything. Now, the solution to this problem is a mod called Exchangers. And basically, what Exchangers does is it gives you nice little handheld devices that you can use to swap out one block for another. Now, I have the resources for this on hand. It's pretty simple stuff, just a little bit of lead and copper and whatnot. The only thing that's a little complicated is the exchanger core, because that does take resonant ender, which is melted down ender pearls in a magma crucible. And we don't really have access to ender pearls at the moment, so it's a little bit of a hassle to get them, but not too bad. So let's go ahead and craft one of these. We made the one that requires power rather than just having durability, so we're going to need to pop this into our infuser. And we don't need too much power right now, just for the sake of demonstration. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that out. And the way that this works is we put down a block that we want to replace something with. We shift right-click it, and then any block we right-click is going to get converted to that block. And it's going to take it out of our inventory, so our dirt is slowly going down. And then it's also going to put the block we're replacing in our inventory. And silk touches it even. So we're getting silk-touched smooth stone each time we replace one. So that's pretty cool. The best part, though, is that we can actually expand this. So now we're covering a 3x3 area. So that is a huge time saver. However, this base level one that we created only goes up to 3x3. It's the only two options it has. And, well, that would work, but it's kind of boring. So let's go ahead and upgrade this bad boy a couple times. And I do have the materials for that on hand as well, because it was quite time consuming to get all of it sorted out. Again, it's nothing too major. It's mostly the same stuff for the hardened tier. You kind of upgrade the one you had before along with a few more bits. And then the reinforced part is a little more complicated. It takes Electrum. The expansion core for that takes the previous tier expansion core and glowstone buckets, energized glowstone buckets rather. So it's a little bit of work, but not too bad. So let's go ahead and upgrade this 2 more times. There we go. And now we have the reinforced exchanger. Give that a little more power. I don't know if it takes more per action or anything like that, but that should be good. This one, of course, holds 1,000,000 RF, which is pretty sweet. So this one doesn't just go up to 3x3, or 5x5, or 7x7. It goes all the way up to 11x11. I'm pretty sure that's the limit. Yeah. There is, I think, 2 tiers higher than this one, but I think 11x11 is going to do us pretty good. But here's where we run into the second problem. I'm going to go ahead and use this And, well, you can see that little error down there? We ran out of blocks. It used up all of the dirt I had, and it couldn't get any more in. Now, this is kind of a problem, because obviously this is going to take a lot of dirt. Now, I can just go out in the world and destroy a random plains biome, and in fact, that is what I'm going to end up doing. But I did originally have a plan for something else I could have done. And while it's not going to work due to a config from the mod pack, I'll still show it to you, just so you're aware it's a thing. Let's go ahead and get these. So what we're going to do is go to another dimension. And the way we're going to do that is via Aroma 1997's Dimensional World. Now, this is really simple to get into. This is the little tool you need to make. This is just stone bricks, a stone pick, a flint and steel, and some sticks. It's meant to be super duper cheap to get into. That way you can get there instantly rather than having to destroy your world for resources. We need to create 10 of these portal frames just by combining the multi-tool that we just created along with 10 stone brick. And then we can basically create a portal with this. So let's go out by our nether portal and do that. Now, the issue here, as you'll see when we get there, is that it doesn't really do what I needed it to. Normally, when you create one of these worlds, and keep in mind that this mod is made very specifically for the purpose of making worlds to destroy. It's meant to work for quarries is the big thing, so people don't have to make huge holes in their world. So here's our portal, looking pretty swanky. You go into it, and you push sneak, and it takes you to essentially a flat world. It has like mobs generating on it, and it has caves and ponds and stuff. But it's basically a flat world where you can set up quarries and destroy the world and nobody cares, right? The issue is that for some reason the Revelation team set a config option to remove grass from this world, which is kind of a bummer. Normally it has a big layer of grass on top, and I was planning to come in here and harvest that for dirt. Now, I could have just changed the config file, but, well, I assume... That was a weird eating. I assume that they did that for a reason. Maybe? I don't know. Obviously, I could go around and harvest little dirt patches, but that would be tedious. So I am just going to go ahead and head off to a plains biome somewhere far away and wreck up the place a little bit, pick up some pretty substantial amount of dirt, I suppose, and then I'm going to come back, clean this area up, and then we can finally get to work trying to work out our build style. So our area's been cleaned up a bit. It actually looks pretty boring now that it's just grass, but of course, like I said earlier, we will be going back through and adding in more detail to the ground as we work on our actual base buildings. That way we can tie everything in together. Of course, before we get to that stage, we need to figure out what our build style is actually going to be, though. Now, last episode, as you may recall, we did look at a bunch of different materials that we may end up using and different options we have for that, as well as a couple different mods that are going to play a really big role in our build style itself, most notably immersive engineering and maybe a bit of embers. And in that episode, we also discussed the general style that we were going to have, which is very steampunk inspired. Now, when most people hear steampunk, there's a very particular style that comes to mind, at least when they're building in Minecraft. And that is almost a medieval style building, but really exaggerated. So it's got the same style that medieval buildings have, the vertical pillars with the different color in between, the individual floors jettying out and getting a bit bigger, but it's all exaggerated. So every floor gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the roof gets taller and taller and taller and points out in different directions. You've got big windmills going on, you've got waterfalls coming down, and lights hanging from the ceilings, all kinds of cool stuff like that. And it's a really cool theme. There's a very good reason that everyone does that when they want to make a steampunk build, but it's also really overdone. So I want to try and do something a little bit different. But that begs the question, what can we really do if we're trying to do steampunk and not go that route? Well, thankfully we have a lot of options, and I want to try some of those out here today. It's the main thing that I want to try and do is lay out a few different build styles that might not necessarily be what we actually go with, but they should serve as inspiration, or at the very least, they should help us kind of narrow down our choices. Now, there's a lot of different ways we could go about this, and I want to try some pretty vastly different things out, but the first one I want to try is probably the least likely to work. I'm a little skeptical of this one, but basically my idea is to have a very clean build style, very bright colors, probably white-walled buildings, brightly colored roofs, and then try and apply the steampunk style to it. Basically add stuff to the outside that makes it feel like a steampunk building, kind of like all the steampunk stuff came later and was added to it. And that is definitely a big shift away from what I normally see with steampunk builds, so it could be interesting, but it might be a little bit too contrasted. We'll find out. So that's just the first one I want to try out. We'll be trying out other styles afterwards and seeing how we feel about it. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and make a facade of a building using that style and see what it looks like. So here's kind of what I'm thinking for that first build style. Now, do keep in mind as we kind of bust through these that because we're going through so many different build styles today and just trying them out, I'm not trying to do anything too crazy with them. So obviously if we did go with this build style, we would try and do things a little bit better. We would try and maybe make some big gears poking out of the roof or, something to give it a little more visual interest. It's a little bland right now, but you get the general idea at least. So with this build style, we would basically have really basic buildings that were brightly colored. So white walls, colorful roofs. We could use like the red stone that we found last time or different plank colors. I think that would work pretty fine. Obviously the ipe wood doesn't work very well with this. Unfortunately, none of the materials I have do. There is one particular wood type that would work pretty well with it, but I don't have access to it, which is kind of a bummer. But you get the general idea, right? We have a very basic, very clean style of building. And then on top of that, we would add in all of our mechanical stuff. So we might have different kinds of pipes going up the walls. These are the fluid pipes from Embers, which, if we want a thin pipe, they're kind of okay, but I don't like how far they stick out from the wall, so not entirely sure we would use those. These pipes from Immersive, though, these look amazing. So I really like these. We'll probably be using these quite a lot, regardless of what build style we choose. So we could do that. Of course, we could also build our own pipes out of chisel and bits, and that would allow us to make like thin pipes or big pipes or broken pipes that were leaking onto the ground, all kinds of cool stuff. So that is definitely an interesting option and something we'll probably end up doing, as much as it terrifies me to get into chisel and bits with details like that. But that's the type of stuff we're going to be adding to it. We also have blocks like the factory block with the animated texture, which that looks a little bit strange because it's just flat against the wall. But we could easily fix that with chisel and bits. We could make this stick out a little bit or add a border to it. So that's not a big deal. It would just take a little bit of extra time to detail it. And we can also do stuff like this. Now this is like just a bit of scaffolding from immersive engineering, kind of running into the building. So on top of this, we could have like a minecart rail. So you'd have a minecart bouncing back and forth, taking care of something to give our build a little bit of kind of mechanical motion. Or we could even put conveyor belts on this and just like pipe items out of the building. Like if this was a processing building of some kind, we could have items flowing out of it. Just something to give our builds a little bit more motion and a little bit more interest. That's something I really want to focus on with this. So little things like that are a big part of the type of aesthetic that I think I want to go for. Of course, like I said before, we will be adding bigger and more interesting details to it, but for now, the basic stuff will do. So that's the first style. Honestly, I think this has a lot more merit than I give it credit for. I think that with a bit more effort, this could actually work pretty well and would give a very interesting end result. Though, I'm not entirely sure how I would do certain things with this style, right? I don't know how I would make it not feel like it was a house of some kind, really. Like, I don't know how I would do our blacksmith building with this style. It might feel a little bit strange, but that's always something I could experiment with. Anyway, that's enough of that. We have plenty of other stuff I want to get to today, so let's hurry on and check out the second build style, which is going to be a little bit darker and a little bit more rustic feeling. Alright, so I cut this one a little bit short. Obviously, I didn't add any of like the pipe details or anything to it, and that's because I don't think this one is going to work out. I kind of like the concept of it. It's actually based, the base architecture style at least, is based loosely on the Vrykul architecture in World of Warcraft, in the Stormheim zone. They have certain buildings that look kind of like this, but they're way more detailed. Now, obviously, I could go through here and add a bunch of detail. The windows, for example, should be much narrower. They should be almost like slits, and there should be big borders around them. The roof should have a semi-detailed border going all around it, and a few other little things here and there. But it's already pretty obvious to me that this isn't really going to work for our style. I mean, it wouldn't be terrible. I think I could make it work, but I don't think it's going to go quite the way that I want it to. So it was worth trying out, but I don't think this is what we're going to be going for. Maybe in the future I'll return to this in a different area and try this out, because I do think if it gets detailed up, if the windows are done properly, if the trim pieces are done properly and all that, I think it has the potential to be pretty cool. But for this area, it's not really cutting it. So on that note, let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is hopefully going to match a little bit better, because it's actually based on a piece of artwork that was actually made specifically to convey steampunk stuff. So this one's kind of interesting looking, a little bit more basic than it should be. As I said before, this is actually based on a piece of artwork that I found. So if I remember, I'll try to put that up on your screens right now, just so you can see what I was kind of lazily emulating. And there's certain things that I obviously didn't do. There's a little bit of building down in the corner and a little bit up at the top that I skipped out on, just because I probably could have done them, but it would have taken a lot of work to get it to look okay. So for the sake of just throwing together some example builds, I opted not to do that. But for the most part, I think it's okay. Obviously, there are some pretty substantial like detail differences. The windows are pretty obvious. Those should be more narrow and have a little more shape to them. There's a lot of like detail trim work that I obviously didn't do, because I would have to do it via chisel and bits, and that would take forever. So I kind of skipped out on that. But the general idea is there. I'm not entirely sure that I would want this as the main build style for a few different reasons. Honestly, I don't think it would ever probably turn out quite as good as the drawing makes it look, because the drawing has a lot of really subtle little shapes and subtle little details that I don't think we can really emulate. You know, the wall textures are very subtle. The little fence thing at the top has a lot of kind of waviness to it. The roof has some waviness to it. It's kind of weathered and worn. And I don't think we can really replicate that perfectly in Minecraft, so I don't know that it would ever look quite as good as the art style makes it, look in the actual drawing. So I'm not entirely sure on that. What I do like, though, is the scale. I actually really like that this is taller, and I think that that would be really, really cool. As I do this, I'm kind of leaning more and more towards the idea of almost making this place feel city-like. So, imagine that we have buildings that don't necessarily look like this, but they're this tall, and you're just kind of walking down the streets and you have all of this stuff going on above you. And of course, when we add more details, when we have stuff like, big gears poking out of buildings, or maybe a windmill here or there, typical steampunk stuff, that could look really cool. Or maybe paths for minecarts crisscrossing up ahead going in between buildings. I'm really starting to dig that idea. So if nothing else, that's kind of a cool thing coming out of today. I think that having tall buildings and probably having them somewhat close together would be really cool. So at the very least, that's a good start. Not entirely sure if we'll use any other elements of this build or not. The kind of ice cream sandwich style color scheme and whatnot. And, oh, that's another thing that's a little off. The green colors, that's the only green wood that I have access to right now. There is one that looks really good. I think it's baobab tree wood is actually a really nice color for this. That kind of matches the drawing. But unfortunately, we don't have access to that at the moment. Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to the next style. And, I think we'll try and do something a little more industrial and see how that feels. So I've ended up building a little miniature factory building, and honestly, I think that looks pretty cool. I actually really like how this style turned out. Obviously, it could still use a little bit of detail, and I don't think that the scaffolding I put on looks particularly good. I think if this was swapped out for the steel scaffolding, which has more of a black metallic texture to it, I think that would look way, way better. But in general, I actually really like this. Unfortunately, I still don't think this is going to work as our main build style. I think that this is just a little bit too specific. Keep in mind that our base area isn't just going to be industrial stuff. It's not just going to be like immersive engineering, or this would be fine. But we're also going to go with, like the bee mods or magic mods. And, if we're going to do a Botania base, for example, building it in a factory feels a little weird. Though now that I say that, I actually can think of a way to make a really, really cool Botania base out of a style like this. Huh. Okay, well, I have a cool idea for that, actually, but my point still stands. This isn't going to work for everything. We need something that's a little more general. And as I was working on these various builds, and there were a couple more that I did intend to do, but as I was working on these, I think I've actually kind of compiled a good idea in my head of what would actually work really, really well. At least I think so. The issue is that I don't actually have the materials to do it. It requires a few blocks that I don't have easy access to right now. So I think we actually need to resolve that first, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to do that today. But that is something we should probably focus on. So basically, there's a couple resources that I just need a lot of, and I think that we're going to have to kind of go out of our way in order to make setups in order to get them. And I think that also applies for just general resource gathering as well. There's certain resources, like, for example, nickel. This texture right here is nickel sheet metal, and each block of that takes basically 1 ingot of nickel. And honestly, nickel is really hard to come by for some reason. It's literally more rare than diamonds. I have gone on multiple caving trips specifically hunting nickel, and this is every single bit of it that I have. Now, I'm pretty sure I can melt these blocks down and get my ingots back. I hope. Otherwise, I have 0 nickel, which is bad because you need it for Invar. So we should probably address my shortage of useful materials. Like, I have an entire storage crate full of ores, but all of the ones that I actually use actively are running pretty low. So we should probably set up some kind of auto mining system as well in the near future, I'm thinking. And, of course, like I said before, there's certain blocks that I need access to, and I kind of need an automated setup in order to get a decent quantity of them. So I think that's probably going to be our focus over the next couple episodes, but for today, I'm going to have to call it here. So I know today's episode was a little weird. We did a lot of kind of spontaneous mini building, which is kind of weird for me. Normally I like to focus on one big project, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And, well, I think that's going to do it for today. So I'm going to get out of here and probably go try and plan out some stuff for the build style that I think I want to go for. Maybe figure out some of the resource gathering stuff we're going to need to do. And, well, that'll do it for today. So if you guys have any suggestions for our build area, because even though I do have kind of an idea of what I want to go for, it's always really helpful when you guys kind of share your ideas with me, because maybe the idea I have won't even work out. So if you have any ideas of your own, be sure to tell me. That would be fantastic. And, well, that'll do it for today. So thank you for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. I'll see you guys next time.